4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to HVAC Success Secrets Revealed, a show where we interview industry leaders and disruptors, revealing the success secrets to create and unleash the ultimate HVAC business. Now your hosts, Thaddeus and Evan.
Hey, welcome back to another HVAC Success Secrets Revealed with Thaddeus and Evan, your internet marketing experts for the home services businesses. We have good conversations with good people, and any good conversation worth having is worth having drunk. So cheers, mates. Cate, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're drinking water as health permits you to stay away from alcohol, which is totally okay. We do not judge those who choose not to partake in the alcoholic beverages and festivities. However, we are grateful that you are here with us and going to drop some knowledge with us today. So we're very excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I'm excited to be here.
You're welcome. So Cate Nelson, she is the office manager at Control Techs in Clackamas, Oregon. We've been working with Cate and Daniel there for a while now, really enjoying that relationship and working with them. But Cate was also recently on the Lady Titans podcast live stream within the group. And I noticed that Sarah Gallardo had posted that you came on and dropped some nuggets on there. And I reached out and I was like, hey, I know Cate. That's awesome. And she said, you have to have her on. She was so great and dropped so many bombs with us today. So I reached out right away and was like, all right, let's get this done. So very excited to have Cate on. She's been in the industry for 5 years now. She started working as, I remember reading it here, a sales within the sales department, correct? As a sales coordinator? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And worked her way up. Now she's running the office with Control Techs and doing an amazing job there. Not only, and actually did so well that Daniel has now permitted her to move across the country down to the south in Louisiana, where she is still the office manager for Control Techs up in the Northwest. So very interested to dive into what that dynamic is going to look like moving forward, as well as operations and all things family-owned businesses and how to navigate those challenges. So thank you so much for joining us, Cate.
Thank you.
So I guess walk us through that original path into the trades. How did you get started? What was the journey into it? And what have been some of the most enlightening parts of it?
Yeah, so prior to working in the trades, I worked in the automotive industry. And I worked with a team of all amazing gentlemen. I was their rotation manager. So I got to cut my teeth in a male-dominated environment, which was a lot of fun. It was very formative for me. And I play well with guys, I think, for the most part. So it laid good groundwork as I entered into HVAC. As we all know, there are few and far between women in our business. So I started at another family-owned and operated HVAC company as a sales coordinator. That's what I was originally brought on for. And then as the company structure changed and they adapted their dynamic to scale their business, I stepped into alternative roles and I was working in their service department as a dispatcher. And then I graduated as a trainer for their CSRs. So I was leading their CSR department. Yep. Amazing. So that's basically the basics. My educational background is in anthropology, polar opposite of what I do now, but I wouldn't change it for the world. Yeah.
Amazing. And then how did you come over to Control Techs? What was that journey like? Was it like, were you sought out by Daniel or were you looking for new employment? How did that happen?
So during the pandemic, they had a huge employment change at the company that I worked at. They were making changes for upward growth. And by all accounts, it sounds like they're absolutely crushing it. So kudos to them for that. And so I took about a month off to get some one-on-one time with my son, reevaluate my professional goals, and to really think, okay, do I want to stay in HVAC?
Right.
And it was a temporary internal conversation. And I was like, yes, of course I want to stay in HVAC because this is an amazing industry to be in. And if you want a solid profession that you can stick with your entire life, it's a great spot to be. So Danny had actually been hiring for a position on Indeed, and that's how it all started. We talked about what he was looking for, and I said, absolutely, I'll be your multi-hat. Let's do this. Never looked back. Yeah.
Well, you've been doing a tremendous job. I know Daniel's spoken very highly about you. And even during my initial conversations with Daniel, he's like, yeah, I can't make this decision. Cate needs to make this decision. So you need to have conversations with her. So glad we passed the test and we've been working together ever since.
Yeah, well, that's very gracious of him, and you folks are amazing. Your whole team is just absolutely awesome. So it's a pleasure working with you guys for our marketing needs. Yeah.
Awesome.
I appreciate that. I'm kind of curious. Anthropology, and I know some people hear that and they're like, they might be like, okay, what is it? I mean, it's studying in its essence, society, past, present,
hmm
norms, values,
hmm
psychology, etc. And so I'm kind of curious how that aspect of thing, understanding humans on a different level, has helped you in the role that you're in now.
So, anthropology, there are 5 major subfields that go into anthropology. And so I specialized in cultural anthropology. I have always been passionate about history. I think it's fascinating. And you have a lot of things that you can learn from history to apply in your present date and time. And there's some crossover with applied anthropology too. You take your research and you apply it to a specified situation, right? So regarding the things that I learned in anthropology, I mean, I think that there's just so much crossover. It's really difficult to really pin it down. But one thing is for certain, that the skills that you learn regarding interpersonal communication, it really helps to build a cohesive picture professionally when you're communicating with vendors and clients and partners, so that you can see that greater picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question, Thaddeus.
Uh, no, and it it definitely did. And so, okay, dealing with, let's use suppliers in having, and let me know if I'm grainy and choppy. I think my internet's kind of a little. I mean, if I had a nickel for
Mhm.
every time I said that on one of these shows, I'd be a multimillionaire. So in dealing with suppliers, I mean, how can one better use the knowledge in conversations and things that you learn from anthropology and having a better relationship with your suppliers?
So when you're working in any given market, you have a cultural makeup in that market, right? Portland is totally different than Louisiana. I mean, sort of. It's still America, but it's totally different. And so by understanding the
Mhm.
cultural climate of the area that you're working in, you can proactively adapt your communication method to resonate and assimilate with the person that you're talking to, like you and I are doing right now. Evan did that at the very beginning of this podcast when he mentioned your guys' drinks, and he said, "And Cate, health conditions aside, no judgment. There's mutual respect and assimilation based off of shared values and cultural norms."
Mhm.
Mm.
Well, that's fascinating. How does that play into
Thank you.
effect then with hiring when you're bringing on new people? Since, I mean, I've met countless people across the United States who have moved across the country.
hmm
And, the West Coast is obviously very different than the Northeast, which is very different than the Midwest and the South. Um,
hmm
how has that played in and really helped you in terms of hiring and bringing new people on the team and then assimilating them with other members and technicians and CSRs on the team?
Yeah, so with few exceptions, inherent personality traits are hardlined globally. Regardless of your culture that you're brought up in, there are personality norms that exist in almost all cultures. And so when you're bringing on new members of your team, what you're looking for, I mean, obviously, besides experience and skill set, is you're looking for somebody who has the necessary personality traits to fulfill that role successfully while also integrating well with your team. A lot of that cultural stuff, like the differences between the East Coast and the West Coast and specific jargon that you'll find in both of those regions, those are things that people just naturally pick up on over time through being present in their new societal group.
Y'all is
Um,
an example.
hmm? Y'all.
Y'all
Y'all
is
is a
an
big
example.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I still totally sound like a West Coaster when I say y'all. Like people at the grocery store, they look funny at me, like that didn't sound right. I'm like, I know, I'm working on it. I'm trying so hard.
I say it in Canada all the time, and people are like, "What the? Are you from Texas?" Like,
Yeah,
nope.
yeah, that's funny. That's really funny. But talking a little bit more about those personality traits and looking for that correct character type to fill a role, the DISC profile. Have either of you guys ever heard of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we actually had
Yeah.
Brian Arzani on our show from Intermetrics last week, and
Mhm.
Intermetrics is a lot about the DISC profile and assessments on that.
Yeah. That's awesome. And it is one of the things that Nexstar uses in their training and their coaching. Before you go and you get to train with them, everybody does a DISC assessment. And so it's really enlightening, all of these things that you can learn about yourself and think, wow, oh, that's the contributing factor for the way that I am and why I manage or coordinate the way that I do.
Hmm. Yeah, having him psychoanalyze Evan and I on the show last week was fascinating. I know it was just some of the stuff he's saying. Like, yeah, that's us, like to a
Mhm.
T, right? It's super cool. So, looking back to, I guess, the conversation around hiring and finding the right people, and also analyzing personality traits. I know you mentioned some of the DISC profiles. Are there certain personality traits that you might look for in, let's say, a CSR? When you're hiring them?
Yeah. So typically speaking, CSRs follow the I personality type. They're influencers. They're very personable and outgoing social creatures. If you've ever met that person that can seem to get along in any social situation and set people at ease, you've got your classic CSR right there. Bubbly people pleasers. In the case of dispatchers, you're looking for that D or that dominant type personality. It's somebody who's methodical, detail oriented. They're less concerned with feelings and more concerned with logistics.
Like Thaddeus.
Yeah. Is that you, Thaddeus? Are you a D type?
I'm a DI. Is mine on there? So that's usually where I rank high on.
So that means that you and I would get along well most of the time, but occasionally we would clash depending on how dominant you are, because I am also a DI type.
Yeah, I feel I've been learning to rein in my dominance on things.
Mm-hmm.
I did the Clifton strength assessment from Gallup, and one of the things that was eye opening on that was, and when we say all these tests to anybody that's listening, I highly encourage you to do a deep dive yourself into these to figure out who you are as an individual. But when I did this, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe, we had a good friend going through the whole process of coaching people and helping people become better at their strengths. On that, one of my tendencies was to steamroll people. And the reason that I steamroll people, though, is because I see them in such a higher level that they can actually see themselves. But the part of that is saying, well, why don't you just fucking do the work to get there? Like, you're so talented, just do the damn work, right? And that's where I saw myself. And so I would mow people over, getting them to try to see that, but not really understanding their own uniqueness as an individual on how they need to be communicated to. And when you understand different people and their different ways of being communicated to, that's when you can effectively lead people. So that's actually a good question. I mean, being an office manager, yourself, there's different personalities, different conversations that you need to have. Are there some things that you've noticed in terms of ways that you can better prepare for certain individuals and have certain conversations with certain individuals?
Yes. So the conversational dynamic that I would have with one employee is not going to be the same that I would have with another, because sometimes my natural inclination as a D dominant type is to be very direct communicator.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, sometimes that can come off as harsh or abrasive. So for anybody out there that's dominant type, like, be aware of that. Folks that are not dominant type might think that you're a little bit like sandpaper. And so tempering that, and the I part of my personality helps, right? Because I want our team to mesh well together, to be able to communicate and to take everybody's scope and frame of reference into account. So I do say that, I typically communicate differently with given employees depending on what their primary personality styles are, to better aid in communication. I'm not perfect at it. Sometimes my D type comes through pretty heavily, and I have to check that, as you mentioned. But I think that I think that you've really made it, and you've tempered that part of your personality when you tell somebody, oh yeah, this is where I actually fall on the scale, and they don't believe you. They're like, wait, you're a what now? I wouldn't have picked up on that. It's like, okay, I'm doing a good job.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So something you mentioned in the notes in our survey was the importance of intentional empathy. So obviously this is where that I comes in, and being empathetic with your team. And Gary Vee talks about this all the time. Being empathetic is one of the strongest traits and character traits that you can have as a leader within an organization. So two parts to that. One, what is it? Two, and what does it mean to you? And then two, how does your D get in the way of that?
Yeah. So intentional empathy in a nutshell, you hear empathy as being this highly sought after and prized character trait, right? Yep. Yeah, because it is. It's a desirable trait to have. That is how we get on the same playing field with people that we communicate with. And so there are two major types of empathy. You have intentional empathy, in which you're applying empathetic principles while trying to simultaneously actually understand the viewpoint of the person that you are talking to by asking fact-finding questions and putting yourself in their shoes, versus blind empathy, which is what I see that is practiced 90 out of 100% of the time. Yep. Blind empathy is, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry you're having a bad day. That really sucks. No digging any deeper.
Right.
Right. So,
well, and that's borderline sympathy as well, right? Where you're just feeling bad for the person as opposed to putting yourself in their shoes and feeling what it is they feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I see a lot of people out in the world that they go about and they practice blind empathy, but that's not the empathy that is going to have a hard-hitting impact.
Correct.
Now, on your second question, how does my D type get in the way of my I type in practicing empathy? So empathy is actually something that I struggle with. I'm not the most empathetic creature out there. It doesn't come naturally or easy to me, which is funny because I am a mom. And so I think people typically associate moms with being super empathetic and nurturing. And I'm more of the, okay, let's figure out the problem. Let's get this sorted. Let's build a clear plan of action so we can resolve your issue and you can thrive in future. My son would tell you all about it. And so that's where my D personality, it gets in the way, I think. The I in me naturally wants to display that empathy, but the D is like, well, let's just be effective and get it done.
Right. I'll be empathetic for you as long as it's quick.
Yeah. And as long as you're committed to having a resolution to your issue. Because, right, you got to get the buy-in of the other person. If they just want empathy and pity, it's not going to get them anywhere.
Correct.
Basically, it's like looking in a mirror right now and hearing you describe things that how I operate and how I work, right? And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that, and I'm going to use blue collar versus white collar as an example here, and not pigeonhole into one particular trade or what have you. At least in my experiences, I found the more of the blue collar side of things, the less empathetic they are, and they're practicing that blind empathy. And that's something that everybody can work on. I know myself too. So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, well, that kind of sounds like me, I don't really know how to practice intentional empathy to be able to better serve my people because I've never been taught that, or I don't know how to do that, etc. What are some things that somebody can do to be more intentional with their empathy?
So if someone on your team comes to you and they express an emotion that's less than stellar, if they're feeling negative that day, or if their day is just not going right, and they have enough respect and trust in you to come to you and tell you that, the worst thing that you can say to that person is, well, that really sucks. Sorry, get over it. Because what you're doing there is you're betraying that person's trust. And so next time they're having a hard time, they're not going to feel like they can come to you and talk to you about it. And as a leader, you have to create an environment in which your team will come and talk to you on important stuff, or even not important stuff. So things that you can do to build intentional empathy techniques and to develop that within yourself. If somebody comes to you and says, man, I'm just having a really rough day, don't just pass it off and say, oh, that's nice. Ask, okay, what about your day is rough? Oh, shoot, your wife accidentally ran your foot over with the van this morning. That must have really hurt. Is your foot broken? It's as easy as just asking some follow-up fact-finding questions, and then you can really start working on building that middle ground. But if you don't ask, you don't know.
It seems like a very specific example there. Has that happened recently?
No, it hasn't. I couldn't think of a better example. So my first day of sixth grade, my mom dropped me off at the bus stop, and I was getting out of the back of her SUV, and she accidentally ran me over, and she was like halfway on me, and I was screaming at her from the open door. I'm like, stop. And she thought I was being dramatic. I'm like, you are literally running me over right now. And that was a moment where my mom had no empathy. So I was like, there's a good example.
Nice.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you mentioned like the parent example, right? Like we have a 10-month-old, 10.5-month-old now. And one of the things that as he's starting to express his emotions more, we want him to actually talk about his emotions. And I think we've had the conversation come up a few times of, hiring millennials. And look, you're going to have to hire millennials, and you're going to have to cater and pander to their sort of what they want. And part of that is talking about things. And so like, I look at, our kid, for example, and again, he can't communicate to us, but what a lot of people do is their kids having a meltdown and say, it's okay. Well, no, it's not okay. They're having a meltdown. It's recognizing the emotions and having that, saying, you're frustrated. It's okay to be frustrated. Let's talk about that a little bit more. And that's part of it too. And like, and you're thinking like parenthood too. And some part of our thing isn't necessarily just for business. It's also for life too. And how can you better apply these principles to even your own family too, for example, is a great help for some of those things. So it's funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah. And I think as another component, it's not just about building those empathy principles. I've also heard what about hiring those millennials, right? Like they're these scary beasts in the closet. Millennials are not. They just have different communication styles that folks of older. Mallory, you just booed me. Nay. Millennials are not scary. They just have different communication styles that older generations are not necessarily trained or equipped to deal with. And shying away from hard conversations, I get it. Nobody wants to have a hard conversation that's going to make you uncomfortable or is something that's going to cause you dread. But honestly, it's just so much easier to bite the bullet and dive into that conversation. Because if you do it, you're going to be so much better off. And then you don't have to worry about it and leave it on the back burner.
Yep. It's funny. We just had this conversation with one of our team members this week, one of our team leads for our departments, about having a hard conversation with one of the members of their team and how that's so necessary. And when you just rip the Band-Aid off, you realize it wasn't as bad as it was. You build it up in your head to just be this terrible, awful thing. And the worst things are going to happen. Then you do it and it's not so bad. The thing that I wanted to point out that I wrote down around empathy was for the people who say, I'm not good at it. And I haven't practiced it before. The first step is just being aware of it. Like once you become aware of it, you start moving from that basic step of like the four steps of consciousness, right? That unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Until you know.
Until you know. And then you become consciously incompetent. Now you know that you don't know, right? And then you move into conscious competence where you know what you're doing, and you are still very much aware of it and thinking of it. And that's the part where if you can at least graduate to that point, that's exactly what Cate is talking about right now, where you're able to ask the questions, pause and reflect and dig in a little deeper with people to the point that it becomes natural. Empathy isn't something that people are just naturally born with. It is a skill. It is a muscle. It's something that you work on to get better at. It's not something that you're not good at and you're never going to be good at. Well, you can be good at it if you make the decision to be good at it.
Conscious decision to commit And once you commit, you will succeed.
Put that on a shirt.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like a motivational t-shirt, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Mallory, write that one down. We're going to put that on a t-shirt.
Somebody
Go.
send Sarah over at Service Titan an email. She loves all of the motivational everything. I think she should brand that shirt.
She's already watching. I already shared this into the Lady Titans Facebook group, and she just commented on the post inside that group. So,
Love it.
so I mean, there's two things that I want to get into. I mean, we go down the millennial road. We can go down the asking and having tough conversations on that. Let's go down the having tough conversations. So we know as business owners or even as leaders, office managers, team leads, whatever supervisory level role that you're at, you're eventually going to have a tough conversation. Now you say ripping off the band-aid and have that. And we don't want to over prepare because then we get into analysis paralysis. And the worst thing you can do is prepare for something, and then the conversation doesn't go the way that you wanted it, and now you're underprepared for it because you prepared for something completely different. Looking at that, knowing that tough conversations are a thing, what are some things that a person can do either before or during the tough conversation to make it easier?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So pre-preparation, you're absolutely right. Don't over-prepare because paralysis analysis is a real thing. Just watch me try and pick out a sundress. Like, ugh, it's terrible. I overthink it. So don't over-prepare, but also don't under-prepare either. You need to have a clear point of intention in your mind of the conversation that needs to be had, okay? So tough conversation, there's all different sorts of those. What type of a tough conversation are you having? Are you having the caliber of a tough conversation of, hey, you did something on a job that a customer saw and they didn't appreciate? All right, well, that's not fun, but that's pretty straightforward. You get both sides, you talk about it, and reach a point of clarity. Are we talking about a tough conversation? Hey, you did something so bad that employment's not going to be an option for you here? That's a really tough one. And leaders, sometimes it comes up, right? But with tough conversations, I find it easy to try and strike a balance between being analytical, a little bit detached, and then popping back in with some of that empathy to help fuel when you get to those low points, right? Because even in a tough conversation, it doesn't have to be all bad. You can still use it as a team building exercise to get that honest, genuine feedback from your employees. If you think that the approach is to go in with a hammer and just bludgeon the other person to death, you're never going to get anywhere. So there are two sides.
Well, the saying is you attract more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. Well, I mean, insert flies if you want into that. And so the more I mean, you can also look at the management sandwich, positive, negative, positive, if you want to go
Exactly.
down that road too. But right. But even, Bobby Bragg here, even mentioned, you have to highlight or list at least your agenda. So then you can roll it and you won't lose direction of while still listening at the same time and starting with the end in mind. And if you start with the end in mind and where you want to get to by asking questions to get them there it's a skill that, again, those 4 stages of awareness that Evan talked about.
And you can even lead with an overview of why the conversation is necessary, right? So I believe in giving people the information that they need to succeed. So instead of sending a super cryptic email to your coworker saying, we need to talk this Friday, and leaving it at that, that's a great way to tee it up for just bad, because that person is going to sit all week worrying, oh my goodness, what does my boss need to talk to me about? They're going to brainstorm 50 million possible things that it could be, and it's not actually. And then anxiety and tension is high when you walk into that conversation. So be clear, concise, set your expectations, communicate what the goal is and why the conversation is necessary.
I like that.
There's a snippet.
Yeah. How do you do that with millennials?
How do you do that with millennials?
So let me walk that back a little bit. I was kind of being a little tongue in cheek on that. And so the other part of the conversation I want to get into is obviously the millennial generation. It's big. I technically I'm born as a millennial, quote unquote, and it kind of almost makes me cringe sometimes. Sorry, Mallory. But so Mallory, in case anybody's wondering, she's our client success specialist. She also helps us out on the podcast. She's watching in the back room, taking notes on this in case anybody's wondering why we're referencing that. But with millennials, and again, it's a different way to communicate, and especially coming from an older generation, older guard. So knowing that we're talking about tough conversations, talking about working with millennials, what are some things that a person can do to better prepare and adapt themselves to be able to help their business, help their team, knowing that they're going to be these younger individuals?
Yeah. So first, banish the idea that millennials are the horned beast in the closet, like I said earlier, because if you have that in your head and you go into it thinking that they are that way, you're automatically going to be biased when you interview these people and we start recruiting them to your team. Okay. And I'll tie it back to a parenting technique that I've applied ever since my son was your son's age, Thaddeus, because you brought it up and it made me smile earlier. So one of the big things as a parent is that I talk to my son like he's a human being, right? So he's 12 years old, but I talk to him like he has the ability and the capacity to understand concepts that most parents don't think 12-year-olds can get, and cluing everybody in, they can get it if you trust them and you take the time to explain and to help coach them so that they can grasp these difficult things. And so if somebody is intelligent enough to ask you the question, they deserve an intelligent response, something that is well thought out from you. And the same applies to millennials. You got to treat them like they're people. You got to treat them like they're competent. And also try to remember what it was like being a young person when you got your career started. How competent were you? How on it were you all of the time? Not so much, right? I can't think of a single person that I know that has always been perfectly professionally driven and 100% on their game from the very beginning. And some millennials are the very same. You treat them like they're competent, and you may have to adapt your company structure to be enticing to them, right? Because they operate a little bit differently. I know that millennials are really big on team building exercises and communication and office parties and incentives. All right, well, if that's what they're into, talk with your business coach or talk with your team leadership staff and find a way to be an attractive organization to recruit those people, because pretty soon you're not going to have a choice. And especially in the trades, we have technicians that are on their way out and they're getting ready to retire. We don't have enough people that are young that are going into trades programs. And so we need to be a proactive part of the solution to get their foot in the door. Treating them like they're pariahs isn't going to aid in that any.
So what are some things that you're doing? Go ahead, bud.
Go for it. I'll go for it. Mine was just a comment.
I know, that's why I was going to be quick. I'm curious, what are some things that you're currently doing at Control Techs, and what are some things that you are planning to implement within the coming months to be more enticing to that younger generation, to bring more people in from high school, from college, and attract them to the trades? Because it's something that I know a lot of people are really passionate about right now.
Yeah. So I don't think that this has come up yet, but we are a union HVAC company. We're a member of Local 290 and IBEW 48. So we have a little bit of a unique recruiting pool because we are able to pull from union members. So that helps. But when it comes to things like training, we strongly encourage and promote training throughout the year. So our field staff, they're going to manufacturer and technical training so that they can build their experience and be more competent on the job. And I think that, even young people, they appreciate the benefit of training. They understand that that's a big deal. That's an investment. When a company is willing to invest in training you, that means that they're serious about employing you. So it's a big one. We also
Mhm.
practice roundtable communication. And if you ask my teammates, they'll tell you I probably talk more than they would like. We talk a lot, but it does facilitate that environment of trust and mutual respect. I'm sorry, Thaddeus, I cut you off, I think.
No,
No,
he's
I
just
was just I was humming in, yeah, in agreement.
Yeah, yeah. We've kicked the idea around of efficiency bonuses and some incentives. The jury is still out as to whether or not that's something that we're going to be implementing. There's a lot of different tiers and levels that go into that, but I do know that some of our training partners, they manage incentive programs for their employees very successfully, and that is fantastic for employee morale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you look at Lead Carrot or leadcarrot.ai or IO or whatever that is. They use a lot of that as well. One of the things, talking about the younger generation, and this has come up in some of our leadership conversations that we've had in the remote workforce, and
Mhm.
especially COVID, and you're doing it right now. You're working remote. Um, especially with the pandemic and people wanting this need to work remotely, but also this innate need to feel part of a team and team building and camaraderie in having this structure within the organization. How can one manage the remote part of things along with creating this great team building culture when everybody's potentially all over the place?
Yeah. So it can be a balancing act. And I think it's not just on the organization, it's also on the individual. And so every individual needs a different level of personal interaction with their team. Some people, like those I dominant types that are really outgoing social butterflies, they need a lot of that social interaction. And so those individuals, they benefit from team building activities on a regular basis. And I certainly can say for that myself that I thrive on social interaction with my team and with communication and team building exercises. And working remotely, I talk to them every day. We talk a lot every day. And so even though I'm not there in our headquarters, I am still there from a distance. And that's something that I made the commitment to myself and my team that even being remote, they weren't going to feel like they didn't have the attention that they needed from me. So that was a conscious decision that I made and a standard that I wanted to uphold so that nobody suffered from me being several states away. I'm 2,500 miles away from our HQ, so that's quite a distance.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic, it changed so many things about the landscape of business operations and workforce environments. And so when I had started on for this company, I actually worked remotely during the first couple of months before our HQ had launched. And so this is not the first time that I've managed in hand with Danny remotely. Did I answer your question, or was there a second layer to that that I missed?
Um, Team building
Team
is the other
building.
part of that. And so like
Yeah.
I like the daily communication and constant contact, and like I look at it and saying, okay, well, if you have techs that are in the field all day long, they start and they end their day at the office for pick up their vehicle, drop it off if that's the way that
Mm,
it works, or
sure.
they like I think back to another industry that I was in that I'm forbidden to say what industry I'm in. Evan will chastise me for it, but it's been a few shows, so I can mention the passenger elevator industry.
Mm,
But the techs that were there, they didn't come to the office unless they needed supplies. So
right.
they would have their vehicle, they could take it home. They started their day, they ended their day essentially remote, and everything was there. They met once a week for their safety meeting. In terms of team building, though, and you think about the camaraderie that you can get from that, how
Mm-hmm.
can you do team building when everybody is and this is kind of a unique situation because you're remote, the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
some of the team or most of the team is not. But when you think about that, how can you participate in team building exercises with the individuals that are in the office when you're not there?
Yeah. So remote meetings and virtual, like you guys and I are doing right now, is a fantastic option for anybody who is strictly remote. There are also a lot of programs and softwares that were developed during the pandemic. I'm trying to remember the name of what it is because I have used it in meetings previously, and it's actually a lot of fun. It allows you to do like random team building prompt cards, and it'll pop up on the screen and send you guys out into a breakout room, and then you do team building activities and you have conversations about all of these random generated prompts. And it's kind of nice because it's not pre-canned, right? So somebody isn't building all of this out on your team and is clued in advance. It's a surprise for everybody. I'll see if I can find the name of that program and I'll send it over to you guys.
Yeah, 100%. Because I'd love to add that into the back end of things. And I know there's also so we did this with our friends, especially when we were on like super lockdown here, that we wanted to get together. But anyways, there was games that you can play online. And yeah, it was a little awkward at first, but like clue games, or like you have your own little team sort of thing, trying to answer the questions. And it's just fun to be able to do that remotely with those sorts of things. So those extra things can definitely help out in terms of the team building aspect of things. So
yeah. Did you get to do the virtual charades? Have you tried that one?
I don't think we did the virtual charades.
Okay. Would strongly recommend. If you think charades is hilarious and hard in person, like it's 10 times more difficult when you do it remotely, and it's a riot. It's so great. You guys can bring your whiskey. You'll have a lot of fun.
So I think instead of the random question generator, we should do virtual charades next time.
There you go. Bring a guest on and make them play virtual charades with you.
Oh man, I think that would be hilarious. We're gonna get John Gonzalez on. He took a break from Facebook and now he's back on. We'll get him on to do some virtual charades. So perfect segue into
one thing I did want to point out really quick before you go into the random question. I think this is a really amazing topic around remote office workers, because it opens the door to bring in incredibly talented people and not require them to be in your office 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month, right? And just constantly in the office. You can have leadership roles outside the office because of what's gone on in the last 2 years. It has opened the door for so many people to be able to work within organizations and truly excel from a remote opportunity. So I think it's a brilliant idea. I'm really excited to be working with you in this journey and continue to help you guys excel. So that's all.
One thing on that is that you can now hire as a business top talent anywhere in the US, or if you wanted to go further, anywhere in the world, really. Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to have US individuals, you can now hire top talent based off of anywhere. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you work. You want to work for us and you're a top talent person, great, you can do it. And I think of Tersh Blissett. Tersh Blissett has built a completely remote workforce. Every single person, they don't have an office. Everybody's remote.
Yeah, it widens your recruiting pool significantly. And so if you've ever been in the position when you're trying to find employees that are directly in your market and you're like, man, I can't find the talent that I'm looking for, I'm going to have to train somebody who's green and build them in-house. That's a great option if you're committed and dedicated to the amount of time investment that it takes to build somebody green. But companies that are thinking about recruiting for remote only positions, I would strongly, strongly encourage that you really do give it serious consideration, because it widens your options leaps and bounds, and you can manage it quite successfully if you're bringing the right person on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, now you can go into the random question.
All right. I was going to have a follow-up question, but I was responding to John. And I'm just going to throw this up there, which is why the leader has to get to know their team on an individual basis. Even if you're remote, one-to-ones are super important, whether they're going to be remote on Zoom, but you can have that conversation. And it's almost like going for coffee with somebody on your team. It's just a virtual coffee where you don't talk anything about the business. You just get to know each other and have those conversations. And I think now, 2 years removed from when everything moved to online, people are more comfortable having those sorts of conversations this way.
Yeah.
All right.
And there's also been some strong correlative data that remote workers, provided that they are getting the sufficient amount of team interaction that they need, they actually report higher mental health happiness. So fun fact there too.
Well, not also higher mental health happiness, but also higher productivity. And I don't want to measure everything on productivity as an organization, although as you know,
Productivity is important. Yeah.
productivity is important, right? So John, I've already talked to you once before. I'll call you again. I love John. John took a break from Facebook. He messaged me on LinkedIn. I think I got back to him like a week and a half later. I'm like, sorry, I'm not on LinkedIn very often. It's just spam people hitting up my inbox. And like, I can get you this many cold lead appointments and cold email, and you run an agency. Garbage. Anyways, yep, LOL, right? Sorry, John lost my train of thought here on this one. Random question. Probably wasn't an important train of thought anyways. So random question. We have 3 queued up for you. It's one of my favorite parts of the show. We have door 1, 2, or 3.
You want me to pick?
Yeah, door 1, 2, or 3.
Let's go with door number 1.
Door number 1. What's something that you completely don't understand?
Something that I completely don't understand. My boss is going to laugh at this one because this comes up pretty often. And you guys are going to think, wow, really? You help lead a business. So how can this be something you don't understand? But math. Okay. Math is really, really hard for me. And I readily admit it's not one of my strong suits. I'm a linguist, not a mathematician. But if you know how many times like I had to repeat algebra 1, you'd just be like, wow, okay, I can't believe you didn't give up after all those tutoring hours. Yeah.
Hey, I still think 2 + 2 = 5 sometimes. So.
Oh gosh, you are so kind. I'm not that bad off though.
Hey, I will say my favorite question my accountant never asked me, or I asked my accountant, was what's 1 + 1? And he closed his blinds and he said, whatever you want it to equal. So.
Oh, saucy. I like it.
I like that. I also let me see if I can practice intentional empathy here, or maybe it might be just blind empathy. I feel you on algebra and failing that. I actually took calculus 3 times and I passed it on the 3rd time. And it was, I feel you. I mean, algebra, I mean, nobody uses algebra and nobody uses calculus. And right. So
I was a straight A student except for math, and so I took it really to heart.
but here's the other thing is like, how much of math do you actually need to know in the business that you do?
Basic math. And Danny can figure out all the rest because he's a whiz kid like that. So, yeah.
Well, and that's why you use amazing softwares to figure out the math for you, right?
It's called a calculator.
Yeah, calculators are good.
Or Excel.
Although I will say, I did see a funny video this week of the Prime Minister of Canada when he was younger saying that he was dysnumeric, meaning that he could not handle and figure out simple math questions. And this is also the same Prime Minister that came out and said that the budget will balance itself. So it makes a lot of sense now as to why that is. Yeah, that's our leader for you.
You said that right as I had a drink of whiskey in my mouth, and like I almost either spit it out or it almost went up my nose, and that would not have been pleasant.
Screaming and tears would have shortly followed if it had gone up your nose.
Right? I would have been beating myself.
It was such a funny video that popped up on my TikTok feed. I love TikTok. It's great. I'm learning a lot on there.
I haven't dived into TikTok yet. I still remember the conversation that we had about it, and
it's an incredibly fascinating platform, I will say. And for the simple reason that you could shoot, and it was funny, I had this conversation with another client yesterday. You could shoot 500 videos on TikTok and get an average of 5 likes a video, but have one video get 400,000 likes. because that's the way that the algorithm works on TikTok. It's fascinating. It's all based on interest. It's all based on trends in the moment. And when people are scrolling through TikTok, they're rarely scrolling through the people that they follow. They're scrolling through the random videos that TikTok thinks you're interested in. And it's just serving you random people. So it's truly a fascinating platform. And I really wish that more people would dive into it from a business perspective and fully utilize it, because it's fascinating.
So what Evan's basically saying is he is going to start for On Purpose Media and HVAC Revealed doing TikTok dances and voiceovers for our business to be able to get us 400,000 likes and views. Is that
Wednesday
what you heard?
afternoons.
Because that's what I heard.
I also heard he said that he was going to wear a bright pink spandex with your guys' logo on the chest in those dance
Yep.
videos. So custom order coming your way, Evan.
All
Okay.
right.
I think it's coming from China, so it might take 4 to 6 months.
Low blow. That was good.
All right. I want to get into the family-owned business side of
Yeah.
things, because both of the businesses that you've worked in have been family-run businesses.
Mhm.
But you have not been a part of said family. And so I'm curious, from your outside perspective, being in that leadership role, what have been some of the most enlightening aspects of those family-run businesses? We see them all the time within the trades. There's a lot of brothers that work together, a lot of father-sons that work together. Now daughters getting into it as well, which is amazing. We need much more of that. However, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you see with that, and some of the biggest pluses and positives that you see with that?
Yeah. So with family-owned businesses, I've typically seen that they do have really tight-knit teams, which is awesome, right? You want your team to be tight-knit and dialed in and everybody on the same playing field. I think that one of the things I've most frequently heard brought up in my Lady Titans group on Facebook is someone who's a part of a family-owned business, and they communicate that they feel like certain members of the family get preferential treatment, or that they're maybe not necessarily being heard because they work for their big brother and their big brother knows best, right? And so a lot of that does tie back into communication. And if you have something that you're looking to bring to the table, you need to come prepared. Bring your facts, bring your data, be ready to pitch it, be ready to present it, and take it as a serious thing. One of the other things that comes up pretty often is work coming home to the dinner table and then talking about work after work while eating dinner with the kids. So there's some compartmentalization there that needs to happen, right? Unless you're the type of person that your business and your personal life just meld seamlessly. I don't know anybody, so raise a hand if you've managed that, because that's tough stuff. You got to have some compartmentalization, so you're keeping those aspects of your life separate. And if you see something that's going on that is really harmful to your business, you have to speak up, even if that is your mom in accounting or your dad and he's the owner, and somebody has this really great idea of, we're going to do this, I'm going to just run for it, it's full steam ahead. It's like, I'm going to pitch this to you. Let's try and revise that, because that could be problematic. And I think the biggest one, and I touched on it a little bit, is nepotism. It's preferential treatment to a friend or a family member. Okay. So I believe in operating upon merit. You need to have clear, measurable goals and values and key performance indicators for every role that you have within your organization. And you should regularly download with your team one-on-one on how they're doing with meeting those goals. Incentives are given according to merit, not because it's your brother or your dad. That is bound to create resentment for your non-family member employees, and you don't want to let that into your environment, because it is so harmful.
So toxic.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is. So that's kind of, there's some like heavy stuff in there, but feel free to pick apart anything that you want to dive deeper into.
Well, one of the things that stood out to me, and what was it, 2 weeks ago? We had Cassie Pound on the show from Quality Heating, Air, and Plumbing down in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And so her and her husband Oscar run the company, but
Mm-hmm.
now they even have their sons are working
Mm-hmm.
in the organization as well. And having rules, that was something that I had actually heard her talk about on another show. We just didn't bring it up on our show, but having rules around working with family such that her sons don't report to Oscar and her. Her sons report to their managers, who the managers then report back to them. And they have that barrier of communication because they don't want that preferential treatment. The interesting part, and you could tell that these kids were raised correctly, is that
Mm-hmm.
it's not just Oscar and Cassie that have that belief around communication and preferential treatment, but it's the boys that have.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be seen differently from their peers to think, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm the boss's kid, so I get this kind of treatment. They want to earn
Right.
everything that they're getting, and it's so cool to see.
Mhm.
And I
'Cause
think
you
that that's
see
really
that.
smart what they're doing over there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. But how often do you see it with kids' sports teams today? And where the coach's kid gets to play second base even though they suck at it, and they get to bat first in the lineup, and they get to pitch, and they get to do all these things just because they're the coach's kid, but they suck. And it's so frustrating as a player on that team, because I was that kid. I was on the other side of that, where it wasn't me getting the preferential treatment, but another kid on the team. Seeing them playing over me was frustrating. It's frustrating as a coach now. I'm watching other coaches do that kind of thing, and it's so frustrating, and it's only hurting that child.
Mhm.
Evan, it sounds like you've got some hard conversations to have with those coaches, my friend.
Oh, I've already been having them.
Oh, have you? Good for
Oh,
you.
absolutely.
Gold star. That's
Rip that
excellent.
Band-Aid off fast.
Yeah. Merit.
Yep.
Merit.
Yeah.
Recognize success and achievement.
I mean, my part of looking into that is saying, okay, what are the KPIs? I mean,
Right.
I look at the numbers and in that side of things, and for a business and the KPIs, and I get there's going to be different KPIs for different individuals. But how do you dictate and set up different KPIs for your family members? And then if they don't hit those KPIs, I guess that's probably the more important conversation, is if they do not hit those KPIs, what sort of is it just like, oh, sorry, try again next month? Or is there some sort of HR gets involved, disciplinary action, writes you a warning, whatever type of things that HR would typically do?
Well, what kind of a KPI and what kind of a role are we talking about here? Because you're absolutely correct. Each role is going to have its own set of KPIs, and I don't think that it is necessary to have different KPIs for family members. That seems maybe a bit extreme in the opposite direction, although I can maybe understand the inclination to go that route if you really want to be above board. But regardless of who's in that position, those performance indicators, if it is one person is a family member and one person is not, the performance indicators are the same. The ramifications for not meeting the performance goals are the same. You just have to follow through, right?
So how do like, I guess, I mean, let's just use a hypothetical scenario. There's 3 siblings, one person owns 50%, 25%, 25%, or even a third, a third, a third. If you're trying to hold your other sibling accountable in an ownership scenario, how can one go about that?
Don't talk to them like they're your sibling. You've seen siblings together, right? Like I think about my younger sister, and when we were little, we bickered constantly because that's what little girls do. And now we're the best of friends, and we have solid communication, and we get to the heart of the matter, and we communicate very effectively because that is something that we've built mutually. And so if you want to run a business with your sibling or with another family member, don't talk to them like they're your brother or your sister. That's for Easter or the other holidays, or when you're at dinner or at a family outing. But when you're in the office, you shouldn't be calling them bro and says, hey, bro, can you do this for me? Is not, hey, Bob, I have this idea. What do you think about it? Or, hey, Bob, we need to dive into these metrics because something looks off on the report, right? So one of the ways that you can start building that bridge is by using direct name communication. Put aside the pet names and the cutesy names. It's not going to get you anywhere, even though it is endearing, right? It's an easy thing to fall into.
Yeah, I call Thad Cutie at the office. So yeah,
that's your pet name, huh? Your cutie.
That's his pet name. No, but you're absolutely right, and that's again, Cassie brought that up as well. At work, it's not hubby, it's Oscar, and it's not kids calling them mom and dad. It's Oscar and Cassie. So you absolutely need to put those boundaries in place, and it needs to be set beforehand. It needs to have the conversations before it even happens in the workplace.
And if a boundary gets crossed, you gotta confront that head on.
Acknowledge it right away. Yeah.
Yes. Additionally to that, I think about the entrepreneur's operating system in EOS. And when you're running, let's say an L10 meeting and somebody comes off topic, you interject the word tangent. And so coming up with a word that you and your siblings can use if you feel they are crossing that sibling owner or sibling coworker, however it is, mom, dad, dad, mom, whatever the relationship is, having a word that can be said. It's like a safe word. Like pineapple.
It is like a safe word. That's exactly what I was thinking.
I was thinking of it in my head. I was like, this is slightly different than a safe word, but just
kind of
for work. Safe word.
Yeah, it's a safe word for work. So, but having that set up in advance, so you know that if you're sitting around at family dinner, like you said earlier, Kate, you're not talking about work. You're not talking about the business. If they bring it up, you say whatever word it is that you said, and they're like, and it checks them and say, oh, right, not supposed to talk about this around the dinner table or around a family outing or what have you. And when you put those in place, I think you can then have potentially a successful business with your family members.
Yeah. And, we talked about it on the side of the fence of how it can affect your business, but we didn't talk about it too much on the side of how it can affect your family. And so, I've seen families that work together and they have such a toxic business relationship that it tears families apart. And that's absolutely heartbreaking. And so for the sake of your family and also your business, having those ground rules in place is going to prevent you from some potentially ugly situations. And, they might still come up even with pre-planning, even with that safe for work, safe word.
Well, and like this is all very real to me. And I have a really good friend who had that, right? Him and his dad are running business, trying to bring him in, his dad trying to bring him into the business. And it was just work all the time, and couldn't have a normal conversation about different things because it always revert back to the business, even when they're outside the business. So the business was great. The business was healthy, but it tore apart a relationship because the business was more important. You have to ask yourself as a business owner and as a family person, what's more important to you, your business or your family? And your family should win 100% of the time. I mean, although some people might say, well, you can choose your friends, but not your family. And, I get that part of things, but like what's more important to you as an individual on that? And when you set those boundaries with people, now you can have that conversation, real, raw, honest, unfiltered, because you've set those clear expectations with each other on what's acceptable and what's not. That also goes back to when we talk about millennials. This also goes back to what we talk about trust. This also goes back to what we talk about what's your personality traits. Everything stems off of those initial things that we talked about in this show.
Yeah, it's all interconnected.
Absolutely. Hence the study of anthropology.
Exactly.
Yeah, anthropology. Yeah, I guess I wasn't really able to answer that question for you at the beginning, but we just answered it now. How does anthropology tie in? That mic drop that you had right there, Thaddeus.
I'm out.
The George Costanza. Cate, this has been so wonderful. We do have one final question here for you, and that is, what is one question you wished people would ask you more, but they don't?
One question that I wish people would ask me more, but they don't. What is something that I wish I would have known when I started on my professional path?
Ooh,
Easy
and what
question.
is something you wish you knew when you started on your professional path?
Yeah. And the answer is don't be afraid to go and get it. You can achieve your goals. You just have to not count yourself out. So if you want something, go after it. Not tomorrow, next week. Do it now. Put the time, put the effort, put the hard work in. Because at the end of the day, your level of personal and professional success, that is directly dependent upon the amount of effort you're willing to put in. And you can do it if you really want to.
And there's Cate's mic drop.
Right.
So I guess it's my turn now. Cate, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for your contributions to this episode. There's been so many golden nuggets within it, and I'm excited to re-listen to it again and take action on a lot of what you said, because the only true failure is in failing to execute on the ideas that you learn. So thank you so much for taking the time today and dropping some nuggets with our audience. We truly appreciate you.
Absolutely.
And until next time, cheers.
Cheers. Hey guys, thanks for watching another episode of HVAC Success Secrets Revealed. Before you go, two quick things. Join our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/HVAC Revealed. The other part is if you took one tiny bit of information out of this show, no matter how big, no matter how small, all we ask is for you to introduce this show to one person in your contacts list. That's it. That's all. One person, so they too can unleash the ultimate HVAC business. Until next time, cheers.